What's up, everybody? Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you on Wednesday night, and we are talking about the schedule. We're talking about all kinds of things with the Bengals as they get set for rookie minicamp, and a lot of teasers have kind of been put out there about the schedule. We already know some of the opponents and all that kind of stuff, but we're going to talk about that. We're going to have a little bit of a shortened show because we're going to have a big show Friday to talk about the schedule release, the aftermath of that. Field your questions on a schedule release / listener questions live episode. So we'll have some fun with that. I'm Anthony Cosenza, joined by my guy, John Sheeran. John, how is Randall? How's the kitty cat doing? What's going on, my friend?
Both are doing phenomenal. One is hanging, one is chilling on the carpet, looking out at
hanging
the
and chilling.
window.
Yeah.
Not a care in the world. She has no concern at all about when the Bengals play the opponents that we already know they're playing, but there's just a tease and announcement of when these games actually happen and everything. So doing good over here.
Good. Well, the Bengals are doing pretty well. They're coming off a good draft class. I guess now it would be 2 weeks ago already. It's kind of crazy to think about that, but they are doing pretty well themselves. They signed Chase Brown already, or reportedly signed him. So as we know, it's a lot easier to sign draft picks now than it was 15 years ago or so because of the rookie wage scale and kind of the slotting system there. So shouldn't be many problems in terms of holdouts or anything like that. That's not really a thing too much anymore. But the next big date, as I mentioned on the calendar, is the schedule release. Now, we've kind of got a couple, and we'll talk about it. We've kind of got a couple of pieces of information on the schedule release so far. But, we know obviously where and who the Bengals are playing, but we don't know when. We don't know what kind of venue in terms of like a prime time, not prime time, later in the afternoon, that sort of thing. All of that has to be sorted out. I think our friends over at All Bengals had an article out. I saw, I didn't read all of it, but I think I saw it out there that, not to expect a lot of 1 p.m. Eastern games, which, John, that is music to my ears. I know it's probably not music to your guys' ears out there, but let me pull this up as we get going with the schedule release here. Let's just kind of rehash in case people forgot or you don't really know. We've got the 23 and 24, and this is on Bengals.com. I'll pin this in the live chat here for everybody to go check out too if they want to. So there you go. Okay. Home games, obviously, you get one each against the 3 division rivals. They are home for the Houston Texans. They host the Indianapolis Colts, not even really much of a road game for the Colts in that respect. They host the LA Rams and hopefully what becomes a revenge game for the Bengals there. They host the Seattle Seahawks. They host the Minnesota Vikings, and they host the Buffalo Bills. So when you see there a lot of those teams, they were, they were on the schedule for the first year in the Zach Taylor era. And then, of course, you've got the 3 away games for the division rivals. Arizona, I am probably planning on going to that game personally. Jacksonville, San Francisco, probably going to be planning on going that one as well. Tennessee, and then away at Kansas City. So those are the home and away opponents there. I'm going to kind of leave this not pinned up in our video quite yet, but we'll keep kind of referring to this because we've got some fun talking points and different things there. The one thing we do know, aside from those slates, John, is that it was announced, and we can kind of take it as that's what's going to happen because it was announced by the NFL's Twitter account that the Bengals will be going to Kansas City for week 17 on New Year's Eve for this what's becoming this iconic game both late in the season and in the playoffs. So that one we know will be very, very late in the season, likely for heavy AFC playoff implications.
So you saw it announced by the NFL. I didn't see the NFL announcement. I only saw Cincinnati's mayor making the announcement and saying, the Bengals and Chiefs play week 17. And that's all I have to say. And then it was Orlando Brown recording it, which was pretty funny. Bengals social media continues to be on the cutting edge of the memes and everything. But yeah, it's kind of gone full circle with this rivalry because the first matchup in the Joe Burrow era was also week 17. It was at Cincinnati, but it was a 1 p.m. game. And I don't think the schedule makers thought much of it at that point. But as obviously the Bengals got good during that season, and the Chiefs were the Chiefs. They scheduled it for Tony Romo and Jim Nantz to cover, and it ended up being one of the best games of the 2021 season. So now it's Week 17 again. This is going to be the 5th overall meeting between two teams, and I guess 2 full calendar years. And just like the Bengals and Bills were scheduled for Week 17 this past season, unfortunately became the DeMar Hamlin game. This is the NFL saying that these two teams, we're pretty damn confident they're going to be in the conversation to be the number 1 seed. And that just kind of shows you just how this rivalry has evolved and has progressed for both teams just staying at the top of this conference. And yeah, it's going to be Sunday, New Year's Eve, 4:25 p.m. Eastern Central Time with, I'm assuming it's going to be Romo and Jim Nantz covering the game. I can't imagine it's going to be any other team. That's still the flagship crew for that network. But yeah, I think there's also like a rule now where it's like CBS and Fox don't necessarily have the rights to each respective conferences. I think they're more kind of like free flowing now. So I thought that CBS was going to have like dibs, if you will, on this game, but it's not really the case anymore. But it's still going to be CBS just because, I mean, it's worked in the past now. I think 53 million people watch the AFC Championship game. People want to watch this game, and the NFL realizes that.
Well, and we're looking at, and I don't mean to downplay any opponent on the Bengals schedule, but this game is now almost, becoming more important than the Baltimores, Pittsburghs, or at least more prominent, even though those are really kind of in the wheelhouse of, this is how the division's being decided. So, you look at that, obviously that's probably the most prominent game. Buffalo's probably a very close second. I think it's a close second because, just the uneven result in the playoff game where the Bengals kind of ran away with that a little bit, but still, you're still looking at, the class of the AFC, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Baltimore's in that conversation as well. Those are some of the teams there. And then of course, we keep saying, Pittsburgh, man, that roster, they just keep winning games. They keep putting together winning seasons. They sneak into the playoffs. That's what's happened the past couple of seasons, despite all of our notions on them. So that's always going to be a tough out. We're going to have some talking points on some of the games coming up here and kind of some sneaky ones, some ones that are, sticking out a little bit more to us. But before we get to that, I want to remind folks again, I think it's above John now. I always said below John, but I think it's above John, the show icon. Click that to subscribe through YouTube. Click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. And of course, it's our show and 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin. They are on the YouTube channel as well, and they're doing a great job with that program. And then, of course, if you like the audio side of things, to get all of the Cincy Jungle podcast shows, you can go on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all of the major ones. We're there. You got to like the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, so give that a thumbs up as well, with about 90,000 people at this point. So go check that out. We stream all the shows live there, and all the stories, all that kind of stuff on Cincy Jungle can be found there. And then, of course, you got to give, there we go, my guy John at A to Z Sports, you got to give him a follow and a watch and a click and a read, all that kind of stuff. Go there too for your Bengals news. All right. So, John, where do we want to start here with some of the talking points? We've got a couple that we talked about before the show that, like, hey, maybe this is talk. Do you have one where you're like, hey, let's start here?
I think it's cool that, this is going to be the 3rd season where you have 17 games, and naturally you're going to have either more home games or more road games in a given year. This year it's going to be the AFC's turn to have that extra home game, and the Bengals are going to have 9 just traditional home games because they're not playing in any international game. That was also news that came out today. Like the London and the 2 Germany games were announced. There was like a Black Friday game too, but that's in the States too. But Bengals are just going to have 9 games in Paycor Stadium and 8 games on the road in domestic territory. And when you add up all the miles, distance traveled from like a linear sense, the Bengals actually rank last in terms of actual distance traveled this year. So not only does it help that you have one less road game and you don't go overseas compared to half the NFL, but also like Cincinnati is obviously pretty centralized. It's a Midwestern town. Their divisional opponents are all pretty close in terms of proximity. They play the NFC West, but they only go to the Pacific Coast. They only go up toward you when they go to Santa Clara. I guess Arizona's pretty much West Coast as well, but those are their two like furthest traveled distances that they have to play. Like they play the Seahawks, they play the Rams, but both those games are at home. I think they host the Minnesota Vikings. That's way up north, so that's also distance that they don't have to travel. They don't really stray too far from Paycor Stadium that much, and not only is that a benefit to the team, obviously, because you're traveling less, and just the times that you travel, it's not that great of a distance that you go. Also pretty good for the fans, too. The Bengals fans have shown that not only are they everywhere across the country, they're willing to travel, especially the ones who are based in and around Cincinnati. So I think for a lot of our listeners, for just a lot of Bengals fans in general, this is a great year to try to circle, as many of those road games as you can, because odds are the flights aren't going to be as expensive as maybe in years past.
Yeah, and a couple, again, be it because of the playoff matchups or, regular season high-profile matchups, aside from, again, the divisional rivals and all of that, a couple of familiar games, almost an annual type of thing for a couple of them, Tennessee, Kansas City, Buffalo, and again, Tennessee and Kansas City, the Bengals seem to travel there more often than not when they face off against those teams. Buffalo getting them at home, obviously they were, it's a team that they went to face them in Buffalo last in the playoffs there, but they get them at home this time. So again, a lot of familiarity in a lot of different ways, even though there's some, kind of some other wonky ones on here, Cardinals, the NFC West essentially on there. So good point on the travel there, but let's go here with this one. What are some of the games here that you think are either the trickiest or the sneaky? There's some, as we go through this all the time, you're like, oh, that's, you do your wins and losses, right? W, W, L, L, W, I mean, as you look at those teams and you kind of, it's hard because we haven't, necessarily keeping a big pulse on, especially the NFC West, on what they've done throughout the year, the offseason so far, but we kind of have a grasp on a lot of the things. What do you think is the trickiest or the sneakiest game on the schedule, even though we don't know where it is? We don't have, prime time and all that kind of stuff. We know where and we know who. We don't really know when.
Yeah, I think, obviously every divisional game is tough. I think people are going to underrate the Steelers again, and like you alluded to in the beginning, that's not very wise, especially because I think the Steelers have had a really good offseason. Like they had a really active free agency period. They had a really good draft. If they're expecting a jump from Kenny Pickett, going to be competitive throughout the year, the Browns will always be, around 500 so long as Deshaun Watson plays at least decently. And the Ravens are pretty good too. So every divisional game is going to be tough. And I think for the most part, their non-divisional opponents are pretty clear cut in terms of who's good and who isn't. I think the Minnesota Vikings are probably a candidate to regress this season. They kind of overachieved last year, which is also what people said about the Bengals. But I think there's more evidence in terms of them taking a step back, and that game's at home. So maybe that's one where I'm like, okay, I'm projecting the Vikings to not be as threatening this year, and it's also going to be in front of Bengals fans. But I think that game might be tougher just because, the Vikings still have talent, and that may be just a team that I'm kind of overlooking. Honestly, I just want to see when they play these teams during the year, just because at this point I can't really give a lot of benefit of the doubt to the Bengals in the first half of the season, just because for 2 years now they've just ran into unnecessary hiccups in the first 8 weeks, specifically last year, obviously dealing with a lot of offensive line issues. And fortunately, you would rather finish strong than start strong and finish meekly, and that's also been the case for the last couple of years. But I'm interested. That's going to be my biggest not takeaway, but my biggest thing to watch for this season, just how quickly and how consistent and stable they start. And I think if they get some teams that they should beat in the first half of the season, they should beat the Colts, they should beat the Texans, obviously, they should beat the Rams. If they run into one of those teams in the first half of the season when they're going through these inexplicable growing pains that they have in the first couple of in these past couple of years, that may be a game that they unfortunately drop.
I mean, the easy one for me is this one right here, whether it's home or away. And it may not be sneaky because of what's been happening. Were they 2-6 or something against the Browns the last few years?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Browns really have, which is surprising in a lot of ways, the Browns have had the Bengals number even at times when Baker Mayfield was struggling and all kinds of different stuff going on. So that one is always the trickiest or the sneakiest, really, in either venue. Those are always tricky. I still think, even though Pittsburgh's roster, you have some questions there. I think Baltimore, Baltimore has, some questions, but I think they've answered a lot with Lamar coming back and whatnot. So I think, you look at some of these. Seattle might be a tricky one, even though that's home. Seattle surprised a lot of people last year. And I think, they just always seem to kind of restock the cabinet, even when a lot of people think the chips are down there. That could be a tricky one. Jags could be tough, Cardinals, but I still, it may be the obvious answer for me. It just remains the Cleveland Browns until the Bengals figure out a way to match up better, whether it's at home, whether it's away. Until they figure out a way to find a better matchup and solve some of the things that just continue to plague them against the Browns, they're going to need to do that. And then, oh, by the way, you now have Deshaun Watson, who has, a lot more time back under his belt to, get reacclimated to football and the, speed of the game, all that kind of stuff. So I feel like that's kind of the trickiest one, even though it may be an easy answer.
Yeah, I don't consider the Browns sneaky anymore, just because the track record just kind of speaks for itself. And we can pick apart the Browns all we want, and we can do what we normally do when we talk about the Browns, but they just have a good track record against this Bengals team. And until the Bengals just show any sense of dominance, like even in their win, this past year, they finally, got the straw off the camel's back in December. Like it was still a pretty ugly game for the most part, and they didn't really just assert like them being better than the Browns even at home. So yeah, that's still something to just kind of wait on until that happens. Like the Browns are always to be taken seriously. I don't even consider I think Seattle's just a legitimately good team who also happened I think to get better this offseason. Now you're dealing with a receiving core with DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba. You have Zach Charbonnet out of the backfield. That offensive line really progressed this season. I think Geno Smith he's pretty much who he is at this point. He's a decent quarterback, so that game is definitely going to be tough, even if it's going to be at Paycor Stadium. Like the Jags, they won the division last year, and I don't foresee them getting necessarily worse if Trevor Lawrence takes another step. But that is going to be the thing here, right? On average, 5 or 4 playoff teams from the previous year end up not making the playoffs the next year, and the Bengals are facing a lot of teams that made it to the postseason last year. So odds are some of these teams will naturally progress. But right now, like on paper, like everyone looks better on paper in May, right? It's just a matter of how the season unfolds, how injuries happen, if inexplicable regression occurs. But like right now, I don't see an obvious team that's like a lot better or worse than what they're being made out to be right now. It seems pretty straightforward. You know what I mean?
Right. 49ers will be a tricky matchup, as we know, but there's some questions at quarterback there, and we'll just have to see what plays out with all of that situation there. So those are some of the trickier games on the schedule, John. So let's switch gears here, and this is kind of the $20,000 question, the $1 million question, whatever. However much prize money you want to give this. Primetime predictions. Last year, the Bengals had 5. And
they were scheduled for 5. They only had 4.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah, they got flexed out of 1. Thank you. So we're pretty much guaranteed at some point that there's going to be a Thursday night game, right? And you kind of feel like that's probably, we've seen them play Jacksonville and Miami and all kinds of teams on Thursday night the past couple of years, but that could also be a divisional game. I don't know if they'll go if the NFL will go that route on short weeks and stuff, but we'll see. We think that there's going to be a Thursday night game, and I would assume, a Monday night, Sunday night, that sort of thing too. But what are your, let's start with how many primetime games do you think the Bengals will be scheduled for based on this, on the opponents?
I think it's got to be 5 again. Like 5 is the maximum that you can be scheduled for. I see no reason, like the Bengals are just really good for ratings, whether some people want to admit that or not, but people tune in to watch Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase connect on touchdowns. So I still see 5 again, just because there's a lot of marquee opponents here. The Bengals are still good until they aren't. So I'm going to say 5 again for them, for sure.
Okay. And how would you see that? I agree with you, by the way. No less than four. I think there's going to be four or five. Um, so how do you see that spread out amongst the primetime games? I mean, I don't think that you're not going to get two Thursdays. So you're going to get one Thursday. And then how do you see the rest of the four playing out? Do you think there's going to be a Saturday closer to the holiday? Do you think, I mean, how do you see that one playing out?
Well, I think this is the first year where you could actually play two Thursday night games, which is just completely anti player safety in for a
Right.
league that likes to tout player safety. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like if you have five primetime games, I'm definitely not dismissing the idea of two Thursday night games. Like the Jaguars seem like the perfect Thursday night
Yep.
matchup for them. You have Trevor
Yep.
Lawrence and Joe Burrow. Like that was a Thursday night matchup before the Jaguars got good a couple of years ago. So I can see that
Mm-hmm.
happening again at Jacksonville. What I'm interested in, Anthony, and a lot of people took a lot of issue to this. Like they had three primetime games scheduled against AFC North opponents, and they were all on the road. Like that's actually I don't think that's ever happened before, and they will probably have at least one primetime game against the Browns, Ravens, or Steelers. And if they don't have any, if it's all on the road again, say if they have two this year against the AFC North teams and they're both on the road, that's kind of some BS. So I would expect well, considering they have more home games than away this year, I would expect that they would have more. It's probably going to be a 3-2 split. I would say three at home, two on the road. Again, I'm just going to say right now, I'm going to say that Jaguars game is going to be a Thursday night game on the road. I'm going to say like the Steelers are going to be like a Monday night or a Sunday night game at home at some point during the season. And obviously, you have the Bills as a potential primetime game. A lot of people were watching that game before it unfortunately got canceled with what happened. So I would imagine
Right.
the NFL is looking at that. The Chiefs is not technically on prime time, even though it's going to be like a national spy game at the prime 4:30 spot on CBS. You have the 49ers, which is interesting. I believe it's going to be the 35th anniversary of the second Super Bowl that they played. And this is like the first time that both teams have been this good in playing each other in quite some time. So maybe the NFL takes advantage of that. There's just a lot of good opponents here outside of the division that not only do the Bengals play at home, but I think you're going to get three primetime home games for the Bengals, and at least one of them is going to be the AFC, which is definitely needed after last year.
Yeah, I mean they had the four because they got flexed out of one, right? And then obviously the Buffalo game got canceled, so they really only, I mean, they were 1 and 2 in there
Yeah.
out of five originally scheduled primetime games. It's just crazy how that all worked out. But um, yeah, and I think because of the luster of the Steelers and the Ravens and the budding rivalry now that the Bengals have kind of come back and become an AFC powerhouse. I think those are, definitely wheelhouse primetime games. I don't know that they'll do Browns Bengals again. We'll see, but I'm not really feeling that one. I like the 49ers one. And I know, and I don't mean to correct you, my friend, but I know you said they haven't both been good for a while. A couple of years, in 21 they played, but that wasn't expected that a
Oh,
lot of people
right.
thought
Yeah.
that a lot of people thought that the 49ers were going to be good, but the Bengals were kind of like, they're okay, and then late in the year they had that matchup. That game was crazy too, but you're right. Also, you're right in a way that now officially these are established good
Mm-hmm.
teams, right? And so I think that definitely is one to watch there. And I'm looking at it again. I don't know what's going to happen with the Tennessee Titans, but they always seem to be pretty competitive, and this has been a budding rivalry there. So maybe that's one that could get on there on maybe a Monday night. I could see that one being a Monday night type of game. I think probably division or that Buffalo game that maybe is a Sunday night game, and then we'll see with the rest. But I would say probably one of the Ravens games, one of the Steelers games, Bills, and then probably a coin flip, Titans, Jags, maybe both of them in there. And then
Yeah,
San Francisco is in the conversation too, I think.
I could see that. Like, I just think like on average, like the Bengals usually face like either the Bengals aren't very good or they face a team that's not very good in prime time just because the NFL has been trying to spoon feed these lackluster organizations with at least one primetime game a year And because of the new Thursday night rules, like they don't want Russell Wilson cooking up a storm 5 times a year on Amazon again. So that's why I think you have greater flexibility with those Thursday night games. And I think you're going to see, not exclusively, but predominantly, like established team, known commodities, teams that are going to be good and are expected to be good. So I'm not expecting like the Colts or the Texans or the Rams necessarily to squeak in there and be a primetime opponent. It's going to be one of these it's going to be at least like 4 or 5, like you said, marquee matchups on this docket. And obviously, there's always going to be AFC North primetime games, and Bengals are the 2-time reigning champs in the division. So they'll want to try to take advantage of seeing one of these 3 teams kind of take their crown in that setting.
So we've talked prime time a bit here. We've given our predictions on that, and we see a couple of comments here in the live chat talking about Ronnie saying Tennessee. Oh my God, again, I guess. Casey and Tennessee are in our division now. It seems, yeah,
Not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, not wrong there. So let's talk a little bit about this here with the schedule, John. What game do you think what's a team that you think could be maybe the Bengals win, but could be a surprisingly, I mean, I'm looking at one specific team, but what's a game where you're like, man, this is a game the Bengals should win based on paper and what we're seeing here, where they're supposed to play and whom, but it may end up being, I guess this goes back a little bit into our trickiest game, but one of those things which seems like a sure win, but then you think about it a little bit and you go, man, this may be a little tougher than originally thought.
Like, I'm not going to say the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals are just hot garbage this year, so not them. I think the Colts and Texans will be interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Anthony Richardson is such a wild card. Like, I have no idea how good or bad he's going to be, but I like Shane Steichen. I think he's got a good scheme, and I think the Colts have obviously been plagued by bad quarterback play, and I think the roster is being looked down upon right now, but it's probably a little bit better than what people give them credit for. I really like what the Texans are doing from a culture standpoint. I think D'Amico Ryans is going to be a phenomenal head coach. I don't know how good or bad C.J. Stroud's going to be as a rookie, though. I think he's going to be a little bit better than Richardson, but Richardson could just be that lightning in a bottle and just absolutely takes the NFL by storm in an unexpected way. Maybe Stroud goes through some growing pains. Both of those games are at home, and both of those games are against teams that picked in the top 5 of the draft. And yeah, it could be just that 1 week where the Bengals kind of overlook them. And I don't want to just say, be lazy and say, oh, it's just another rookie quarterback. No, I think both teams have done a lot to try to best improve the rosters and best improve their overall situations with the coaching staff. And sometimes that's enough of a change. And if you just have just enough talent, you can find just that right week to get hot.
Where I think those 2 games could be particularly tricky, treacherous, whatever adjective you want to use there, is if they are on a short week. They've got the Thursday game following that game, right? And so while you say that, both of those games are home, Houston and Indianapolis, let's say you host that team and then you've got a Thursday night game coming up against a divisional rival that you're traveling to, right? Or maybe it's something at home and you have that, I don't think this is in the DNA of Zach Taylor and this team, but there is the propensity sometimes to overlook some of those teams, particularly when you are picking towards the top of the draft. Both those teams, as you mentioned, picked in the top 5. So, I mean, that's where I think that can be a really slippery slope, is if there's a short week when they schedule those teams, even though it's at home.
I would just be really impressed on an unrelated note, but like I still think the Bengals are the best team in the division, even though the gap between them and the Ravens is very, very slim at this point. And I think the Steelers are better than Bengals fans give them credit for. And again, the Browns have a good track record. I would be very impressed if the Bengals find a way to go 4-2 in the division this year. They went 3-3 last year. They had some stinkers, obviously, but as good as the Bengals are, and they objectively are, and as much as we expect them to win the division again, going 4-2 against these teams that know you obviously so well and have all gotten better in their own respective ways, I think it would be a great accomplishment to go 4-2 and to have some primetime wins against them too. Like, like they could have beaten the Ravens at Baltimore. I don't know. I still don't really know what happened at Cleveland on Halloween.
That was a hideous game. Yeah.
So disgusting. And maybe you're just destined to have one of those games here. It's a long season, man. And when you have an unfortunate injury like Jamar Chase kind of pop up on you, days before the game, sometimes maybe things can get out of hand. But I think that's one of the accomplishments that I think this team can be really proud of if they end up going above 500 in the division and actually win the division for a third consecutive time, which I don't think has happened in recent memory in the AFC North. It's a very tough division to repeat, let alone back to back to back.
Yeah, and that Browns game on Halloween kind of was the catalyst of the big run that they went on late in the year. I mean, they started, they dominated the Panthers and the Falcons, and they really went on a run. From there, One Nation Underground says, why are they making us play the Titans, Chiefs, and Bills every year? WTF? Well, simple answer, ratings, John. These are teams that are good teams, and they are teams that they're in the same conference. But I think ratings, that's part of it, but also just how the schedule cycle falls, right? I mean, that's just how they do it. And,
it's a first place schedule. Like, that's why they're playing the Chiefs and Bills. Like the Titans, I think it's because it's the AFC South part of the rotation. But if the Bengals want to win the division every year, you're going to face division winners from your conference.
Right. All right. So the Bengals do not have, I think the NFL also announced teams that will be going to Europe this year, and the Bengals will not be one of those teams. Your thoughts on that, feelings on that? Are you bummed? Are you secretly excited? Are you, I think there's a lot of cool elements to them, obviously traveling abroad. And, if Bengals fans are able to make that trek, obviously it's like a once in a lifetime type of thing that you go and do that. So there's a lot of things with that, but the time change and all that kind of stuff, the risk of, that travel affecting the style of play, there's pros and cons to it. So I guess, where do you stand on the fact that the Bengals are appearing to not be going to Europe?
It's great. It's great for me from a logistical sense, but man, I don't know about you, but I think it was like the Bucks Seahawks game in Germany, and that crowd looked amazing. Like they were singing Country Roads like at the end of the third quarter. Like that seems like an amazing atmosphere, because we've had London games for like the better part of a decade now, and I think, obviously, we have fans in the UK who watch this show, and shout out to you guys. And I'm sorry that you guys aren't going to get a Bengals game there for like the fourth consecutive year, but just the emergence, or maybe just me learning about the NFL fan base in Germany, really excites me. And I would love to eventually, because I've never been over to Europe, I would love to see an NFL game over there, and it'd be really cool if the Bengals got to play there. But that just really surprised me, and I'm a little jealous of the people who do get to travel and see a game over there.
You thought maybe they were gonna play?
Yeah, maybe. They weren't gonna play like the Chiefs or anyone over there. Like they were always gonna have that game in Arrowhead. They were always gonna have like the marquee games on the Bengals schedule here. So, but if they would have played, I don't know, like the Colts or like the Seahawks or something like that would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think the element of traveling and just kind of the atmosphere there and all of that, it brings a nice new angle to games and to the league and everything. But what does stink for a team in one respect is if sometimes that counts as a quote unquote home game. So there is a bit of a disadvantage there as well. So if you are that home team, you kind of feel like, oh man, really, so you theoretically lose a home game by doing that. One of the teams do. So, that in that respect, I can see where teams kind of balk at the idea a little bit. But I think overall, I think it's really cool. We've seen how well received the game is abroad and in the UK and in Europe. So very, very cool. And, maybe the Bengals will get there again in the next couple of years, but they, as of now, are not slated to go to London, Germany, or Mexico City. They also have hosted things too. So we'll see. But, the official announcement comes Thursday night at 8 p.m. We'll be taking the air Friday to talk about what the schedule looks like, answer listener questions. We'll go live with that and have some fun doing that. John, about the opponents and what we kind of know about the schedule right now, what else do you want to touch on? We've talked about primetime. We talked about surprise teams, potentially teams that, and of course, marquee games on the list there. What else you want to go over?
Yeah, I just want to hammer home again. Like, I think the Bengals have been more impressive than people give them credit for being on the road these past 2 years. I think they're 13-7 regular season and postseason combined. But to have 9 games at home now, the home field advantage at Paycor has never been Paycor or Paul Brown Stadium has never been higher, and that stadium is always going to be packed now. There's backlogs of people trying to get season tickets. There's the demand to get into the stadium has never been greater, and now you have 9 games there again like the Bills, the Seahawks. Every AFC North team is going to be competitive, but some of your quote unquote softer opponents are going to be coming to Cincinnati this year, and you might not get that week 1 home opener, which is another aspect because they've had 3 consecutive home openers in the past 3 years after going 8 or 9 years was always starting on the road, it seemed like. So the Reds play at home that Sunday, week 1, which leads people to believe they're going to be on the road this year. So you're talking about 9 home games in a 16-week stretch because you're probably ending at home because you're on the road the week prior at Kansas City. So that's probably going to be advantageous for the Bengals. And like they've laid some stinkers at home, and they've been more reliable on the road than maybe what was expected. But I think that's a great advantage for them after being on the road for a lot elongated stretches last year. Like they had multiple 2 or 3 week road stretches in 2022, and they honestly fared pretty well after that. But to have 9 home games compared to 7 road games to finish out the 16 weeks after week 1, I think is going to be really good for them.
It's a good point. And I mean, the last couple of years in their playoff runs, they're combined 2-0 at home and 3-1 on the road, 0-1 on a neutral field if you count the Super Bowl as such. So, I mean, I guess that was technically a road game given the fact that the Rams were playing in it. But I mean, still impressive, especially with the atmospheres that they're going to and the talent level that they travel and beat in those respective playoff runs. So, and then to your point also about the last week of the season where it could be at home, that's probably going to be a divisional foe too, because the league likes those games to matter if at all possible. And, by slating the division game at the end of the year there, obviously that heightens the stakes and, has teams maybe thinking that they're going to play their players longer or more. And so, I don't think I can't remember really many times that the Bengals and the Steelers have ended the season in the final game. It's usually been Browns or mostly the Ravens, quite often the Ravens, even back in the Andy Dalton and days and everything. So hasn't been so much the Steelers, a little bit with the Browns if memory serves, but it's been a lot of the Ravens to end the year. So it would not surprise me if that's Baltimore again in that final game, probably at home.
Yeah, and that could just be the very last game of the regular season, depending on how healthy Baltimore is and how good they are, and if they are, still in the race. Just depending on what the race is for the AFC North at that point, because I think there's just one primetime game that week, and it's the very last game. It's the Sunday night game, so that could just be Bengals Ravens if we expect both teams to be as good as they are. And you're right, I think it's predominantly the Ravens. Like the Browns were the last opponent 2 years ago during 2021. I believe the Steelers were the last ever team that Marvin Lewis coached against in the NFL. I think that was the week 17 of 2018 or something. But yeah, it's almost exclusively the Ravens.
Right.
Yeah, which is why they don't start against the Ravens in week 1. I know that's been some people's predictions. It could be at Baltimore on primetime week 1, but if they're likely to end it at home against Baltimore, it's not likely that they're going to be at Baltimore to start the season. But we don't know. We'll know in 24 hours.
We will know in 24 hours, and we will break it down for you on Friday, talking about all things schedule release, answering your questions as we go live Friday I think, John, you're set to join me. We may have a
Mm-hmm.
couple of other guests here. Time to be determined, but probably earlier in the day if you're okay with that, my friend. Just so we kind of really piggyback on the news of the schedule release, but we'll let you know when we're going live. And of course, you can get all of our stuff, as I mentioned, on YouTube, the Orange and Black Insider YouTube channel. Another 3 and Out episode coming out soon as well on the channel. And then, of course, all of the audio stuff on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. All of the shows on the Cincy Jungle Podcast Network are there. Anything else that you want to share about the schedule, or are you ready to drop the mic and get out of here, my friend?
I'm ready to drop the mic, and I'm going to do so by shouting out Foster Moreau, man, because we were on the air. And we were talking about the tight ends, and all of a sudden it hits the wire that Foster Moreau is diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And when you hear that an NFL player is diagnosed with cancer, 4 or 5 months before the season starts, you think, man, like, what's his future going to hold? 6 weeks later, he's been through treatments, and now they're projecting him to be ready, I think, even before training camp. And the New Orleans Saints gave him a 3-year deal worth $12 million with incentives, $8 million guaranteed. So congratulations to him for going back home. He's a New Orleans kid. He played at LSU, and he's got a pretty good contract after 4 solid years with the Las Vegas Raiders, and gets to go back with his quarterback. But I'm just glad that he's doing well. That was such a shock. He was such a popular name with Bengals free agency, and unfortunately, I guess both sides maybe probably weren't going to get to a deal. But the fact that he's healthy enough to sign a contract and potentially play this year after the diagnosis, nothing but amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I felt a little bit like a dummy, as I often do on this show, after what I went on yesterday and I shared that news that the Saints were going to be offering him. I didn't have the figures for it, but the Saints were likely going to be offering him a contract. And I kind of said, hopefully it's, number one, a sign that he's doing well, and maybe he'll be able to play sooner than anybody expects. But it was maybe a little bit of an idea, kind of in the same vein as the Devin Still thing, where it's like, hey, let's keep him on a roster to make sure that needed health insurance, all that kind of stuff is taken care of for the player in this situation. But it would seem, John, which kind of some miraculous things are happening, and he's making great progress from the diagnosis, maybe ready to play a lot sooner than a lot of people thought he would. So recovering well. So not only is it just a great story, hey, cool gesture by the Saints to offer him a contract, even if it was for the health insurance purposes, but amazing progress seemingly made by Foster Moreau and his health, his path back to being healthy and overcoming the cancer diagnosis. So all around, really, really cool story.
Yeah, it's definitely a contract that indicates that he's going to play like immediately. And It just happens to be with a team that, like he said himself, probably saved his life, because he took the physical with the Saints, and that's how he discovered it. And again, now he not only gets to play with the team that gave him that physical, but it's his hometown team. He's from Louisiana and all that jazz. So happy for him, man.
Me too. That is going to do it for us. Again, we mentioned a little bit of an abbreviated episode because we had one yesterday. Go check that out. We did the one tonight. We're going to do one on Friday as well. And then, of course, we've got 3 and Out dropping for you. So we got back-to-back episodes of Bengal podcast shows for you. Hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully you subscribe and check out all of the shows on Cincy Jungle's podcast network. Go check out cincyjungle.com and my guy John's A to Z Sports Bengals takes there. You got to go check that out. We appreciate all the support on this show on our respective websites, and we look forward to bringing you more Bengals content. Schedule release coming up. We're going to be talking about it. We'll see you then.